All right, good morning, everyone. We're here for the version 1 deep dive of the Education Specialist Deaf and Hard of Hearing Math and Literacy Cycles. Today is October 22nd, 2025, and we can go to the next slide. All right, so on this slide, you'll see the different logos for all the different performance assessments that are managed by the Commission. We have the CalTPA, where administrative candidates are going through and completing performance assessments to earn that preliminary administrative services credential. We have the CalTPA in green, and that is for candidates earning single subjects, world language, and multiple subjects credentials. Then the PK3 credential has its own CalTPA, given that they have a different set of teacher performance expectations. And then there is the Education Specialist CalTPA, which you are all here to see today. There are 5 different versions of the Education Specialist CalTPA, and we're talking about the deaf and hard of hearing credential today. Go to the next slide. Today we'll do introductions, some norms, talking about some outcomes. There is a resource folder, a Google folder that is linked in the presentation. We also will talk about the structure and theory of action, accessing materials, faculty policies, and resources. We'll be talking about both the math and literacy performance assessment cycles, looking at steps 1 through 4, thinking about the overview, evidence table, essential questions, rubrics, and then we'll be talking about some helpful hints for each step. We'll go over the list of condition codes for the 2025-2026 academic year and some program supports and contact information to ensure that your program is receiving all of the information that we put out and information on upcoming webinars. We can go to the next slide. So my name is Marissa Luna Lopez, and I am a consultant here with the Performance Assessment Development Team. I work on the Cal APA project as well as the Cal TPA Cycle 2 for single subject world language and literacy performance assessment for the other versions of the credentials that have that requirement. So multiple subjects, PK3, and all 5 of the education specialist credentials. And I'm joined here today by my colleague, Julie Holmes. Julie, would you like to say good morning?
Yes, thank you, Marissa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie Holmes. I am the other consultant on the performance assessment team, and I will be walking you through the math cycle. And it's exciting. We're so excited to kick off the deaf and hard of hearing performance assessment. And thank you for joining us.
All right, we're also joined here by our colleague from Evaluation Systems of Pearson, Lori Thornley, if you'd like to unmute and say hello.
Good morning, welcome. I'm Lori Thornley. I am a program manager with Evaluation Systems, and I've been supporting the California performance assessments since 2016.
Thank you. All right, we can go to the next slide. If you could sign in via the chat feature, please include your name, your position, and your institution. And while folks are doing that, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. Some norms for today. If you could please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. It's helpful if your camera is on. You could use the chat feature to post questions that are related to the current topic. Please post questions of a general focus, not necessarily program or specific. We will have time for those types of questions. We always want to avoid multitasking during the webinar to ensure we hear all the information, and we want to honor time for all participants by moderating our participation. All right, so the outcomes of today's meeting, we'll be looking at version 1 overview, step-by-step instructions and rubrics. We'll be looking at the assessment guides, templates, and evidence tables in the folder, and some support. Looking ahead to program and candidate supports. Take a look at the next slide. This is the materials that are in the Google folder that we will be putting in the chat. An annotated bibliography, a candidate checklist, assessment overview, the guides for the MPA and the LPA, the templates for the MPA and the LPA, and a slide deck from today's presentation, but we will be putting that in the folder after today's presentation.
And Marissa, we've been joined by Tracy.
Nice. Welcome. All right, go to the next slide. Okay, the Education Specialist CalTPA structure and theory of action. For both performance assessments, there is a step where candidates plan, where they teach and assess, reflect, and then apply. There are different emphasis areas for each of the performance assessment cycles. So in the math performance assessment, it's focusing on math as the curriculum and content and practice and goals. But in the math performance assessment, as opposed to the literacy performance assessment, in the math, we are looking at one lesson. And the literacy, we're looking at 3 to 5 lessons in like a mini unit of study. And so different teacher performance expectations are assessed in both performance assessments, but they are both based on that plan, teach and assess, reflect, apply cycle. Go ahead and take a look at the next slide. Oh, I think we jumped ahead of one. Okay, so some resources that are available on the website. This is a this is a live link, and again, it'll be in the presentation after today. But there are some required, acceptable, and unacceptable supports listed on this website, some faculty guidelines for confidentiality of video recordings, faculty resources, assessment materials, preparation materials for candidates, program implementation resources, and how to request vouchers. Now, the last piece that's on there, secure materials and submission examples, those are absolutely coming soon. This is a very, very new, brand new performance assessment. And the materials were only released on September 23rd. So we will not have any submission examples at this time. And we are working diligently and as quickly as possible to get some submission examples, but we won't have any until we get submissions from candidates, are able to review them and see that they're a good representation of a mid-range scoring sample. So we are working to get sample submissions, but we do not have them yet. Okay, go to the next slide. Um, just a reminder of the passing standard for version 1. Both performance assessments have 8 rubrics, and passing on both represents 16 points. So a candidate needs to earn 16 points across all 8 rubrics, and as long as they meet that minimum of 16, they pass. If a candidate falls short and scores either 15 or 14 points, a program may still recommend the candidate for their preliminary credential if they have evidence that the candidate met those teacher performance expectations in other places within their program, either coursework or clinical practice. So an example of that secondary passing would be a candidate who scored medium range to well on maybe their plan And in their teach and assess, they did medium range to okay, maybe twos and threes. But when they got to their reflect stage or their apply stage, they did not score so well. But a candidate may have been in your program for at least a year if they are doing a 1 year program, or maybe even two for an intern. And in those years that you've known the candidate, they did their 12 formal observations. And in those observations, they were able to effectively reflect on their performance and meet those teacher performance expectations through that clinical practice experience. So if a program sees that a candidate does not meet the minimum 16 passing standard, but then they do beat those, they get those TPEs in other spaces, the program can fill out the paperwork and use a standard or a passing score of 14 or 15 to recommend a candidate on either the math or literacy performance assessment. Now, a candidate is, we are not required to to pass a candidate with the secondary passing standard. If a candidate meets the secondary passing standard, but you as a program do not feel that they've demonstrated those TPEs in other spaces, then the candidate can be asked to complete the CalTPA, EdSp CalTPA again, to meet that requirement in that space. So it's not an automatic thing. Um, it's really at the discretion and of the program to be able to make that judgment. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the math performance assessment, and I'd like to invite Julie to speak about it.
Thank you, Marissa. Okay, so our purpose today is to walk you through the math cycle, whether you are a program coordinator, whether you are faculty, maybe you're a candidate and you're ready to embark on the math cycle. So we want you to feel comfortable in fully understanding the rubrics and what is asked throughout steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to walk you through the evidence table, walk you through the essential questions and the rubrics, and then give you a highlight of things that you need to know for each step. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk real quick about the deaf and hard of hearing credential authorization. This is a credential that is birth through age 22, and it authorizes the holder to provide instruction and special education support to students with a primary or secondary disability of deaf or hard of hearing or deaf-blind, and services to students with a hearing loss. And you can go ahead and continue to read the rest of the authorization because it is quite long. And what the math cycle is intended to do is to have candidates provide math instruction and informal assessment with appropriate supports and provide instructional adaptations to students who are aged 3 and older. Also, it has candidates teach one math lesson to an individual student with an IEP. And candidates can choose if they're going to plan and teach the lesson to just one focus student that they select, or they can plan and teach the math lesson to just the focus student and additional students who require similar support. So either is fine. Let's move on to the next slide. And a big picture overview of the MPA, the Math Performance Assessment, is where candidates are planning one asset-based, UDL-focused math lesson that includes discourse strategies, that might be American Sign Language and or spoken English. And they create 2 learning goals for their lesson. One learning goal is math content and a practice, and they will include American Sign Language content standards if their focus student is an ASL user. The second learning goal is an academic language development, or ALD learning goal. And with that, once they have their two learning goals, they will create an adaptation or multiple adaptations for their focus student or their focus student plus the additional students who require similar support. And once they have their math lesson and their focus student and their learning goals, they will engage students in active higher order thinking. They will monitor their learning and respond intentionally to student needs. They're going to, once they're done teaching and recording their videos, they will analyze the effectiveness of their math lesson and thinking back and using evidence from their planning and or their teaching, steps 1 and 2. And finally, in step 4, they describe those future steps to advance the learning of the math content and the practice, as well as academic language. So that's the big picture of what they're doing in the MPA. All right, so let's begin with the first rubric in the DHH Math Performance Assessment. It wants to go back and forth between our PowerPoint, but we are looking at the guide. The rubrics follow each step. So at the end of step 1 instructions, you will see the 4 rubrics for step 1, because we really want you going through this with your candidates. We want candidates interacting with the rubrics as much as possible and really understanding what's being asked and measured. So at the top, you'll see the essential question that we just reviewed. And the essential question, again, frames the rubric and it deconstructs all of the constructs. Scoring begins at level 3, and that meets the TPEs. We want level 3 teachers. So going through this and understanding each aspect of a level 3 construct is extremely important. So as we look at level 3, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 constructs that the assessor will be looking for clear evidence. In level 3, the evidence is clearly stated, it's well thought through, it's informative, it's meeting all of those ands, like you see in that first construct, math content and practice. So looking at all of those things is very important. Now, a candidate would move down to a level 2 if the evidence that is submitted is vague, minimal, or unclear. A candidate would move down to a level 1 if there is no evidence or it's lacking or absent. So let's go back to level 3 and talk about the constructs. This is their planning stage. So their lesson planning is using recent information, recent available information to them as they develop one grade level appropriate math learning goal. That includes both math content and the practice. That grade level learning goal is very important. It is important that candidates understand to use grade level standards. If they are teaching a 4th grade focus student, they must use 4th grade state standards. They would not adapt and say, well, I think that this candidate would benefit from a 2nd grade standard, so I will use that instead. No, that is not how the state standards are meant to be utilized. They're using the grade level of the student that they are teaching, and they would receive a level 1 on this rubric if they are not using the appropriate grade level standard. Let me call out your attention to the last construct in level 1. The very bottom. Candidate's lesson plan contains inaccuracies in math content. We don't want candidates teaching the wrong math content to students, or they did not use grade level standards or core content connectors. So that's how important it is to review that with candidates. Going back to level 3, the second construct, they are creating that math academic language learning goal that aligns with both content and the practice. We want to see the alignment with the academic language to the content that the student is learning. In the third construct, if their focus student is an ASL user, this is an option. Doesn't have to be an ASL user, but if they are, then their lesson plan must contain a grade level ASL content standard as they develop their learning goal. The next construct, they are planning a math lesson that leverages the student's assets, whether they are cultural and or linguistic assets and or interests. So it's a lot of and ors there, I understand. But what that means is giving the candidate some flexibility and choice in looking and getting to know their focus student, realizing what are some assets that they bring to the table. No deficit thinking. We're not looking at what they cannot do. We're looking at what they can do. So really thinking, is that a cultural asset? Is that a linguistic asset? Is it an interest of theirs? And so I'm going to use that to my advantage as a teacher to really help them understand the math content. The next construct, they are engaging the students in discourse strategies. So ASL and or spoken English. So it could be ASL, it could be English, it could be both. But really engaging them in those strategies. And finally, their planning is describing how they're going to monitor student learning during the math lesson. How do they know? How do they plan to monitor that their student or students are learning throughout the math lesson? Are they going to observe them? Are they going to sit with them one-on-one? Are they going to have an exit ticket? Or are they going to play a learning game? Like, how will they know? So they need to think through all of these things. Let me call out your attention quickly to level 2 and some pitfalls that candidates make sometimes that might bring them down to a level 2 on this rubric. As you look at the top of level 2, there's that and or in bold. So maybe their learning goal included a math content, but they didn't include the practice. That would automatically bring them down to a level 2. If their academic language learning goal is not aligned to the math learning goal, then that would bring them down to a level 2. If their planning does not clearly use appropriate grade level ASL content standards, that would bring them down. If they're not clearly leveraging students' assets, if they're attempting to engage in discourse strategies, but maybe it's a minimal attempt, it's an unclear attempt, it's not a clear engagement. And finally, if they're vaguely describing how they're going to monitor, like sometimes we see candidates say, I will monitor students' learning. That would be a very vague attempt at explaining how they're going to monitor. We are looking for specifics here. So some things and examples to help you walk your candidates through understanding the rubrics. All right, I think I can pick up the pace a little bit now for 1.2. Hold on as we go back to our other slide. We're on the PowerPoint.
Is the slide okay, or are we staying in the guide?
We've got to stay with the guide.
Okay.
The rest of the time, yeah. We're toggling back and forth between a PowerPoint and the guide because we want to give you the most accurate information. So rubric 1.2, starting with level 3, there's one construct. So they're describing how they're going to provide that safe and positive learning environment that will support the student or students as they progress in meeting the math content and practice and math academic language learning goals. A level 2 would be a minimal description, and a level 1 would be they didn't describe how they're going to provide that safe and positive environment. So these are things that you as faculty can help and support with helping them think through that planning. In rubric 1.3, I believe there we go. There are two constructs, but there's an or between them. So it's an either or. So their planning is going to describe how they will collaborate with and or facilitate instructional support personnel to support the individualized instruction of the focus student in the math lesson. Or their planning is going to describe how they will collaborate with and or facilitate instructional support personnel to support the assessment and or the instruction of the other students while the candidate teaches the math lesson. So candidates need to select which route they're going and how they're planning to collaborate and work with their instructional support personnel. Instructional support personnel is defined as a paraprofessional in their classroom. It could be the cooperating teacher, could be the gen ed teacher, speech and language, pathologist, OT. It could be any instructional support personnel that are supporting students in that classroom. All right, and let's go to 1.4. There are 4 constructs in level 3. And this is all about their planned adaptations for the focus student that are clearly informed by and connected to recent information gathered about the focus student. You'll see that and in bold. So candidates need to go into depth about what informed the reasoning for their adaptations and how it's connected to what they know about that focus student. If you look at the level 2 construct, there's an and or. So maybe it's informed by something, but they didn't connect it to that recent information. So that will bring them down to a level 2. Let's stay with level 3, the next construct. They are describing in a clear way how those adaptations will build on the focus student's assets and or their interests. And they're explaining how the adaptations will support the focus student's learning needs. And let me point out those 3 asterisks after learning needs. Underneath the rubric, you will see where we call out a few descriptions. So we really want candidates being really clear what we're asking. So point that out to your candidates and talk about that. And the final construct, their lesson, clearly addresses the focus student's IEP goal or goals. It could be one, it could be more than one IEP goal related to the math content, practice, math academic language, and or their well-being and or their behavior. So lots of and ors that gives flexibility to the candidate. So how are they relating it to one of those things or more than one of those things? And the IEP goal is not the same as the math learning goal or the academic language learning goal. The IEP goal is set, as candidates know, and you know, that has already been created. That is that legal document. Their math learning goals are scaffolding to meet those state math content standards that they have selected. So we don't want candidates substituting an IEP goal in lieu of a math learning goal or an academic language learning goal. It is a separate thing. Okay, so that concludes step 1. That's half of the assessment right there, and that's a lot for candidates to plan for. All right, let's move into step 2. Thank you. But before we do, let me go over some helpful tips and reminders for your candidates for step 1. There's 4 rubrics. They're planning that math lesson for their one focus student or focus student plus additional students who require similar support. And the focus student must be a student who's on an IEP, ages 3 or older. Again, that grade level, I cannot emphasize that enough for selection of their state standards for math content. And they select a practice and they create that learning goal and their aligned math academic language learning goal. And don't forget, if that focus student is an ASL user, to put in those select an ASL content standard. Think about that focus student. Really leverage their assets and or their interests. Engage in active engagement in discourse strategies such as ASL and or English or both. Collaborate with instructional support personnel to support the focus student and or the group. What are the needs of the classroom? How is that candidate thinking through the best strategies to use their instructional support? Design those adaptations that are based on information. We're not designing adaptations out of nowhere. They're based on something, but what are they based on? So what is it informed by? What was it connected to? And how does it build on their assets and address their IEP goals? And then how are they going to monitor student learning? All right, let's move into step 2. Now this is the fun part where they get to teach. So I think we can go straight. Well, this is okay. So in step 2, they are facilitating their math lesson. They are video recording the whole thing. And then they go back and they select between 1 up to 3 clips. They could select 1 clip if that's fine. They could select 2 or 3. It is up to the candidate. If you look at part E, that is where they upload their video clips. And the total video recording time can be up to 15 minutes. Anything beyond 15 minutes, the assessor will not be watching it. And that might contain some really good information. So make sure your candidates for all of the videos that they submit up to 15 minutes of recording time, and then they write their commentary. That's part F. For written, that can be up to 8 pages. This is where they explain what they're doing in those videos and why. The commentary should not have information about something that cannot be seen on the video clip. So it should not include information that cannot be corroborated by watching the video. If the candidate prefers, they can do 10 minutes of a video recording of where they are talking verbally to the camera or in American Sign Language. So either one is fine if that is their communication preference and they would prefer to just turn on the camera and sign and or speak about what was happening in their video clips and address those prompts in that way. That is completely fine as well. Okay, let's go into, I believe, the guide as we look at the 2 rubrics. Let's skip this part. Thank you for navigating, Lori. All right, so let's start with 1.5. This is the first rubric in step 2. I will call out your attention to the essential question at the top of the rubric, that how does the candidate create and sustain a safe, positive learning environment and apply those UDL strategies that include discourse strategies and support for the student or students in making progress towards math content and practice and ALD. So let's look at level 3. They're creating and sustaining their safe, positive environment. A level 2 would be create and or sustain. So it's one or the other. Back to level 3, they're using those UDL focused strategies to support their student or students in making progress to meet the learning goals. A level 2 would be a minimal use of those UDL strategies. So maybe they're unclear about what UDL strategy or strategies they plan to implement or that they are implementing and how they are using those. And a level 3 at the bottom would be they're applying discourse strategies and UDL focused practices to assist the student or students in making progress towards those learning goals. A level 2, you'll see that the UDL focused practices do not clearly assist the students in making progress. So things to think about, and look at that level 1 at the bottom. their teaching of the presented content is inaccurate, and or the lesson planned in step 1 that we read about and we're so excited to see is not reflected in any of the step 2 videos. That will be an automatic 1 on this rubric. So what you plan for must be what you see in the video clips. Okay, and let's move on to the next rubric, 1.6. We'll look at the essential question. There we go. So how does the candidate monitor and respond to the students to support their learning? So in level 3, they are monitoring the students' learning. A level 2 is an attempt to monitor. And back to level 3, they are responding intentionally to the student or students to support their learning. A level 2 would be where their response is vague or non-specific, and they did not support the learning during the math lesson. So things to think about as candidates are teaching and writing their commentary and talking about the evidence for these 2 rubrics in step 2. Let's go back to the PowerPoint and look at the step 2 helpful tips and reminders. And please go through this with your candidates. So there are 2 rubrics in step 2. Creating and sustaining that safe, positive environment is very important. Using those UDL focused strategies to support the content and practice in ALD. Applying those active discourse strategies to support learning. Monitoring student learning and responding intentionally in real time. Ensuring that their instruction is reflected from what they planned. And just a reminder that their commentary must directly align with what we're seeing in the videos. All right, let's go on to reflect, step 3. And we'll go into the guide again. This is an area sometimes where we see candidates lose a little bit of steam. So this is where they really need that extra oomph of adrenaline and encouragement. As we look at the guide, so they're going to reflect on the effectiveness of what they planned and what they taught. What did this focus student learn and how do they know? All right, let's go look at the guide real quick for 1.7. So the reflection is tough. Reflecting is a tough skill. So the more that you can incorporate some of these prompts into your fieldwork observation form, into some of your coursework is very effective for candidates as well. Because reflection is a skill that is learned, and it's tough sometimes to be vulnerable and say, I thought this would be effective when I planned it, but actually when I taught it, this or that happened. And here's what I learned from that. So that is tough for candidates. And I think sometimes maybe that they think on the performance assessment that they will be, dinged or marked down if something that they've planned or taught was not effective. And that is not the case. We're looking for growth. We're looking for reflection and analysis of that reflection. So in looking at the essential question, how does the candidate really reflect on the effectiveness of that asset-based UDL lesson, and that included the discourse strategies in that safe, positive environment? So level 3, they're reflecting on what was effective. The next construct, they're analyzing, not summarizing. That's a different skill. Summary, we've already watched the videos. We've read the commentary. We know what's happened. We want the candidate to analyze it, look for trends and patterns, strengths, areas of growth, really break it down. What was effective about their adaptations for their focus student in making progress towards those learning goals? And next, they're reflecting on the impact of creating and sustaining that safe and positive environment. I know that they've talked about it in step 2. And sometimes candidates go, I've already talked about this in step 2. I'm not going to talk about it again. If they want to read about it, they can go back to my step 2, commentary. This is a different lens. This is different evidence. This is looking at a Part G template. And so it is very important that candidates then go, I need to now look at this construct and question in a way that answers it from a reflection point of view, not a teaching point of view in step 2. So I know that sometimes candidates go, this is duplicative. I've already been asked this question and I've already answered it. So it's important that they look at it from that new lens. And final construct, they are referencing evidence from steps 1 and or 2. And what this means is in their reflection, in their analysis, they're thinking back to something that they planned or in a way that they taught it, and they've incorporated that into their reflection and analysis of the effectiveness of their teaching. Okay. And we can move into our final step, step 4, apply. Sorry, we can't do that yet because I always forget to add these. Oh my gosh, Marissa is probably laughing her head off at me because I do this every webinar. Recap of step 3. So it's one rubric. They're reflecting on the effectiveness of their asset-based UDO lesson, analyzing those adaptations, reflecting on the impact, and referring back to evidence to support their analysis. Now we can move into step 4, apply. Let me see if this one is correct. Yes, so in step 4, they are thinking about their planning, their teaching, their reflection. All those are steps 1, 2, and 3. And now they have to think about what they're going to do for the future math lessons to advance this focused students' learning, to support their learning goals. And they use Part H for this step. Part H is a narrative, a written narrative of what they've learned. That can be up to 4 pages, or the candidate has a choice. They can turn on the camera and do a verbal or an ASL response up to 6 minutes. So written or a verbal response or ASL is fine. Let's go into the guide and think about how they're going to apply all that they've learned as we look at rubric 1.8. Looking at level 3, I know it looks dense, but there's an or there, so stay with me. They're applying what they've learned to describe those future steps. They are describing in a clear way how they're going to advance the students' learning of the content and practice and ALD, explaining how they're going to collaborate with and or facilitate that instructional support personnel, either to support the individual instruction of the focus student or the assessment and or instruction of the other students while the candidate teaches the lesson. And then referring back to appropriate evidence from steps 1, 2, and or 3. So planning, teaching, and or application to support their future steps to advance those students in math. Another helpful tip before I close out on step 4, it is helpful with rubrics, and this is Marissa's tip, so I'm giving her credit, is when you put your candidates together in groups and they're going through these level 3 constructs, flip it to a question. So look at level 3 construct 1. Did you apply what you learned in the math cycle to describe future steps for math instruction for your students? And they say, yes, I did. Okay, where? Show me in the template. Show me where, or in your verbal response, how you did that. So it's great to kind of flip it to a question and put the onus back on them so that they are clearly understanding the construct, what's being asked, and that they are providing that clear evidence. Let's go back to the PowerPoint and I will summarize step 4. There's one rubric. This is the application step, applying what they learned from this whole math cycle to think about future steps that are going to advance the learning of content, practice, and academic language, and explaining how they're going to work with, collaborate with their instructional support personnel on either the individualized instruction or the instruction of the other students for future lessons. So I hope that this helps understand the full cycle of the math lesson that they are creating. There's a lot that goes into it. Sometimes as veteran teachers, we take it for granted, like, oh, I got this super easy, but a brand new developing teacher is thinking through their norms for a safe, positive environment. They're thinking through how they're going to monitor student learning, maybe practice in being prompted and how they're going to respond intentionally. Thinking through and understanding those state standards, and then how to write that learning goal that includes content and practice. Thinking through academic language, what's needed for this focus student to access this math content? What would help them better access this? How can I be a better instructor to them? So lots to think about. Candidates need your support through this, but this is all about just really understanding that focus student and providing those strategies for support as they plan their math lesson. All right, I will kick it back to you, Marissa.
And I think maybe we could just take a 5-minute break and before we switch over to the literacy cycle.
Sounds great.
All right. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the literacy performance assessment for the education specialists, CalTPA, deaf and hard of hearing. All right, and we're talking about version 1 here. Okay, so this is the authorization statement for the deaf and hard of hearing credential. And we get a lot of questions from programs and candidates about where they can film and who should be in their videos and who they should be planning for. And so this is on page V. It's in the front matter of the assessment guide. So it's Roman numeral 5, but the candidate is to complete the EdSp CalTPA literacy cycle with students aged 3 and above. So whatever grade level they fall in, as long as they're aged 3 and above. And the candidate is to teach one or more students with an individualized education program or an IEP. So they have an option of teaching one student or more than one student. So however the candidate chooses to complete the cycle is up to them. For the purposes of this assessment guide, we refer to the candidate is the person who is completing the performance assessment. Students are the children, young adults, learners that they serve. And so we will use candidate and student. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is an overview of the literacy performance assessment for deaf and hard of hearing. This must be completed with students who have an IEP. The candidate will plan 3 to 5 literacy lessons, including corresponding assessments that include foundational reading skills and a selected additional theme from the ELA-ELD framework. Their lessons will have one ELA literacy and one ELD learning goal. So lessons will have 2 goals. And they will identify a focus student or a focus child. Again, we'll be calling them focus students for the presentation. And they will teach and video record all their lessons and assessments. From those videos, they will pull their clips. So they should record the lesson from start to finish. And then after they administer the summative assessment, the candidate will determine the next steps for instruction for the focus student or the group that they choose to teach. The candidate will then reflect on the progress of the class and or the focus student and the effectiveness of their literacy instruction. And then they will make that data-driven decision to either reteach or extend the learning to support the focus students' literacy development. All right, so taking a look at step one plan, the candidate is to, with the support of their cooperating teacher and or supervising faculty, gather and review recent available literacy assessments, IEP information, and other contextual information about the students or student. Then they will select a focus student and then describe 3 to 5 lessons, including those assessments that include foundational reading skills, the additional theme, and that also integrate English language development. If you are familiar with the previous versions of CalTPA, maybe cycle 2, that was literacy, there have been some shifts with the naming of the documents that candidates submit. So you can attend to that as we take a look at this evidence guide. We can take a look at the next slide. So for this step, there are 2 rubrics, and the rubrics are reflected in their essential questions. And so the first essential question is all about the candidate and their planning. And both questions are about their planning, but they have slightly different focuses. As planning this is so important to setting it up and setting the candidate up for success. So, how does the candidate's learning segment leverage or use and build upon the student's assets, include assessments, align lessons to create a progression of learning? So, like a mini unit of study. What's in lesson 1 is built on for lesson 2, and so forth, depending upon how many lessons the candidate chooses to include. A minimum of 3, but no more than 5. And how does that also include collaboration and or facilitation of instructional support personnel? And so again, that instructional support personnel, like Julie said, is any qualified adult in that space. So it could be a paraprofessional, cooperating teacher, speech and language pathologist, whomever is in that space that the candidate is either collaborating with or facilitating. And how do they also address developmentally appropriate ELA literacy and ELD goals? So a lot of things in that sentence, a lot of things that the candidate is doing, and many constructs that they will need support with. Then in rubric 2.2, the candidate is now applying findings from recent literacy assessments to plan for the selected foundational reading skill and the additional theme while integrating English language development. Go ahead and take a look at these rubrics. So, as Julie had said, when we're in level 3, right, that's where we start. And taking a look at that first construct, their planning includes developmentally appropriate ELA literacy and ELD learning goals. Now, you'll see these little asterisks next to some of the words, and this rubric actually has, if you look in the assessment guide, a significant amount of information underneath it. But for the purposes of today's presentation with the screenshot, we didn't include all of that because it would have made the writing on this screen just really inaccessible. But as you look at the assessment guide and see those little asterisks, they are there to provide additional information to both faculty and to candidates to further define, clarify, or give examples of a term that is being used here in a rubric. So please make sure you review those items and understand what is being asked for in this construct. Now, if the focus student is an ASL user, the candidate's planning needs to use appropriate grade level ASL content standards to develop learning goals. Then the candidate's planning leverages student assets and cultural and or linguistic and interests. So looking at who the candidate is planning for and using their assets to move them forward in the academic task. Then the candidate includes both formative and summative assessments that clearly align with the ELA and ELD literacy goals. The candidate's lessons and assessments align with one another to create that progression of learning, right? So the first lesson, is the foundation for the second lesson, and then they build upon one another throughout the lesson. So it's a mini unit of study, not just 3 individual unconnected lessons. So it's important that they are connected and that they build upon each other. And the candidate plans collaboration with and or facilitation of those instructional support personnel. So that is an important piece here, and however a candidate does that will depend on their context. But taking a look at our level 1, there are some constructs to pay attention to. The very last one there, candidates planning contains inaccuracies in literacy content or does not use grade level standards. So it's very important that a candidate uses those grade level standards and that they also accurately plan for foundational learning skills and their assessments, and that they create that progression of learning. So if there's any inaccuracies in the literacy content or they do not use grade level standards, it's unfortunately a 1 on this rubric. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at 2.2. And on this rubric, I was able to include that where the asterisks are and some of those additional definitions, examples that help define what's in the rubric. So like I said, rubric 2.1 had a good amount of information underneath it that we weren't able to include in the presentation. So please review that in the guide. So in level 3 here, the candidate is applying specific findings from those recent literacy assessments. So recent, that means that it's still relevant. And there's a lot of ways that a candidate can assess a student to ascertain their present levels of performance. So taking a look at work samples, IEP information, even observations and conversations with a cooperating teacher are all excellent foundations for building a lesson plan and unit of study for the students engaged or the student engaged in the learning. Then the candidate needs to clearly plan for direct, systematic, and explicit approach to teaching the foundational reading skills. That is something that comes directly from SB 488, and the candidate needs to very directly teach that foundational reading skill, show that they have a plan, systematically do so, and then again, explicit. It's not something that we would hand a student a book and ask them to discover. It needs to be very explicit, the skill that we are teaching around that foundational reading. And the candidate needs to plan for a selected additional theme. And those themes are meaning making, language development, effective expression, and or content knowledge. So they are foundational reading skills and then one additional theme, candidate's choice. And it says theme or themes. The candidate may choose more than one theme, but they are only required to choose one theme. And they also need to integrate English language development. So every credential authorizes English language development, and even if the candidate chooses to work with students who are not English learners, they will still need to plan for English language development. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at some helpful hints and reminders. There are 2 rubrics here. Assessments should be completed with aged 3 and up. The review and describe recent available information. That's the students' present levels of performance. That's what we're looking at. And using that to build out the lessons that they will teach. It can be taught to the focus student and others, or just the focus student. And then they will plan 3 to 5 literacy lessons addressing foundational reading skills with the additional theme, each lesson having 2 goals. And a last piece here is the candidate needs to plan for formative and summative assessment, and the summative assessment should be in the final lesson of the learning segment. So it's important to make sure that the candidate very clearly plans for those assessments, and that summative assessment needs to be in the final lesson. All right, let's take a look at step 2, teach and assess, where all the action happens. This is where the candidate teaches and video records all lessons, start to finish. It's important as well. Sometimes candidates think they have to just record video clips, and what they think will be the best example of evidence might not end up being the best example of evidence. So our recommendation is to record the full lesson, watch the lesson again, and then pull a clip from a longer video in order to allow for the candidate to best demonstrate their competence with what's asked for on a rubric. Um, Something important to think about, especially if we're using a phone to do video recording, check the settings to make sure they don't have it on the most high definition video settings. Those videos can be really, really big and can be a challenge to compress. And then also putting a phone on airplane mode or some other do not disturb mode, because unfortunately something fantastic can be happening in class and then they get a phone call from a telemarketer or something of that nature and it disrupts the video. And that's heartbreaking for a candidate because you can't get that back again. And so it's so important that if they are using like a device of that nature, that they are attending to the size of the video as well as the continuous nature of the video. Also, just check and make sure there's enough memory for video clips of that length. It's another thing that a candidate gets to, the end of the lesson, goes back and realizes that only the first 5 minutes were captured as opposed to the full 40 minutes they planned for. Um, the candidate would then, from that video, like I said, choose 1 to 4 video clips like they did in the MPA, and then they will provide commentary where they explain what they are doing and why for each video clip. Let's go ahead and take a look at the essential questions. And again, like the math cycle, there were the majority of rubrics in step 1. Well, in this cycle, the majority of rubrics, half of them are in step 2. So The cycles are intended to complement each other and assess different skills. And so that's why there are different requirements of each. So in rubric 2.3, this is where the candidate is to provide instruction in the selected foundational reading skill using that direct and explicit approach. In 2.4, we're looking for the candidate to provide instruction in the additional theme or themes and integrate ELD. In 2.5, we're looking for the candidate's use of assessments to monitor learning and adjust instruction. So looking out at the group or the focus student, how are they doing? What instructional decisions does the candidate need to make sure they're meeting the needs of the student in front of them? And the final rubric in this step is how does that candidate provide results, right? Specific, actionable feedback to the student or students about what they did well and or misconceptions and gaps in knowledge. So explaining to the students what they did well or need to work on, doing more than just that's not right or great job, kid. We want to give them some more specific, actionable feedback. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at rubric 2.3. So again, we always start at level 3. That meets the teacher performance expectation. And the candidate teaches that selected foundational reading skill using that direct and explicit approach. And then the candidate clearly explains why the direct and explicit approach they're using engaged the students and supported their progress. So when looking at these constructs, typically something that says candidate teaches, that's going to be evidence that we'll find in a video because we'd be able to see them teaching. And then when they clearly explain, that's typically evidence we'll find in commentary because that is the opportunity to explain why they did what they did when teaching. But we are able to look in all videos and all commentary for evidence to meet a level 3 in this rubric. But I also want to call out attention to level 1, the last construct there. The candidate's teaching of the selected foundational reading skill is inaccurate, and or the learning segment plan in step 1 is not reflected in any of the step 2 videos. Now, if the candidate submits 4 videos and 3 of them are absolutely on topic and everything that they planned, but then the 4th video is not, the assessors will disregard the 4th video as evidence. And taking a look at inaccurate foundational reading skills, this can be a candidate saying that a letter makes a sound and it doesn't, or they might identify a foundational reading skill that is not a foundational reading skill. So foundational reading skills, they are listed below print concepts, alphabetic principle, children using ASL finger spelling. Those are a lot of different examples of foundational reading skills, but if the candidate says that, something else is a foundational reading skill and it's not, then that is another way that a candidate may score a 1 on this rubric. All right, let's take a look at rubric 2.4. So the candidate teaches the selected additional theme and framework to actively engage the students in the lesson. They clearly explain why their instruction on the additional theme moves the student forward towards meeting that ELA and ELD goal. And they intentionally provide integrated ELD. So this rubric really focuses on that additional theme and the appropriate use of integrated ELD. Okay, let's take a look at 2.5. So this rubric is focusing on the use of assessments to monitor student progress and making adjustments to instruction based on the results of those assessments that the candidate is using. And let's take a look at 2.6. And this is very much so connected with 2.5. So the candidate uses those assessments to provide specific actionable feedback to the students about their literacy and language development. And in level 1, the feedback is developmentally inappropriate. Excuse me. The students can be aged 3 and above, and with this credential authorizes teaching up to young adults, up to 22 years old. And so it's important that the candidate provide feedback that is appropriate to the students fitting or sitting in front of them that they are working with, and they would justify the developmentally appropriateness of the feedback they provide in their contextual information, because there are some times where a candidate may be working with a student who is deaf and hard of hearing may also have an additional concern or developmental consideration, and they would make sure to explain that. So the assessor and every assessor of this performance assessment is a person who holds the deaf and hard of hearing credential and a significant amount of experience as a classroom teacher of students in this category. So they would be able to make that call about whether or not feedback is appropriate. All right, some helpful hints and reminders for step 2. There are 4 rubrics, so it's half of the rubrics in this performance assessment. The candidate needs to teach the learning segment they planned. Unfortunately, we have seen folks plan something and then teach something else, so it's important to understand that what they planned is what they need to teach. They will submit 1 to 4 video clips. It's a total of 20 minutes of video across all 4 videos. So it's not 20 minutes per video, it's 20 minutes total across 1 to 4 videos. They will provide written ASL or verbal commentary that describes what they did in the video and why. And the video and the commentary should align. What is seen in the video should be described in the commentary, but a candidate can't write something in the commentary that didn't happen in the video. If that is the case, the assessors will disregard it as evidence. So it needs to be corroborated. What's in video can be in commentary. Let's take a look at the next step. Step 3, reflect. And this is the process where the candidate reviews the summative assessment that they engaged the focus student with or the small group that they taught. And they analyze those student results to provide that specific actionable feedback on that assessment. They reflect on the student's progress and the effectiveness of their own literacy instruction. And then they submit the summative assessment response along with the scored rubric and that feedback, that specific actionable feedback. And using all this information, they move forward. So let's take a look at the essential question for this step. That's a lot, right? How does the candidate identify those understandings, gaps in knowledge, provide that feedback, determine what was effective, and then the last step here is to provide feedback to the family and or guardians of the focus student to support the caregivers in understanding the assessment results, so they can support the focus students learning beyond the classroom. So taking a look at level 3, the candidate accurately identifies understandings and gaps in knowledge. Then they provide that focus student with specific actionable feedback. and the candidate clearly describes what was effective about their instructional approach and what changes they would make if they taught the learning segment again. Now, sometimes candidates get confused on this. They think if they taught it again to a different learner, if they taught it next year, it's what they would do again if they had it to do over again with the same student. So this is their chance to describe what went well and then what they would change. And then the last construct here is providing the focus students' family or guardians with feedback specific to the ELA literacy and ELD goals with how they can support them beyond the classroom. Let's take a look at some helpful hints. It's one rubric. The candidate is engaging in that data-driven decision-making based on summative assessment results. They're providing specific actionable feedback to that focus student. They're thinking about what was effective about their instruction for that focus student, changes they might make to a lesson or lessons for that focus student, and then how they will communicate with the family and guardians of that focus student. And step 4, where they take the information from steps 1, 2, and 3 and make a decision about how they will continue the learning, whether they need to reteach any part of the learning segment or they can extend the activity to support the focus students' literacy and language development. There is a video component to this step. So it's important for candidates to work on this performance assessment at a pace. I've had candidates in the past, especially fall candidates, that say, man, September through Veterans Day break is just such a long time, but I'll go ahead and plan and teach my learning segment over and then give my final assessment, my summative assessment. And then when it's Thanksgiving break, I'll take some time and go through this and finish my cycle and then submit it. And they forget that there is a follow-up lesson and a video that they have to make. And as you all well know, when something gets too far away, it just goes, kids forget about stuff. Students forget about things. And so the candidate needs to plan to to take the good time and do a good plan, then teach their lessons, and then review that summative assessment to be able to move the next as soon as possible to their step 4 apply. So they can teach that follow-up lesson and the student will still have it in their mind about what they were working on. It's a hard thing to come to a class of, fourth graders and say, remember what we did 6 weeks ago? Well, here's a follow-up lesson. And so it's important to work at a pace when completing this cycle and this step. But the candidate will video record their follow-up activity, provide a 5-minute clip from that follow-up activity, and then also commentary. And it's up to 5 minutes of either ASL or verbal commentary. Okay, go ahead and take a look at the essential question. So how does the candidate apply the analysis of the focus student's assessment results, looking at both formative and summative, to plan and provide an explanation for and teach a follow-up activity? And they will need to explain and cite evidence, refer to evidence from steps 1, 2, and 3 to say, this is why I'm making this instructional decision. Let's go ahead and take a look at the rubric. So in this rubric, the candidate has a choice. So that's why you see a big or right in the middle. But their first construct is that they apply the assessment results, so those summative and formative assessment results, to plan a reteach where they have a targeted intervention that they are focusing on for this focus student. So if the candidate chose to teach a small group that included the focus student, the follow-up activity is needs to be planned specifically for the focus student. Now, if they saw that the small group that they pulled all had a similar need to the focus student and they choose to teach that small group, but they planned specifically to address the focus student's need, that's perfectly fine. That's absolutely acceptable. But they also could plan just for the focus student, even if they taught a small group in their learning segment. So assessors are looking for that activity to be planned specifically for the focus student. And if you look over at the level 1, at the very bottom, candidates follow-up activity is not planned for the focus student. There's just a couple of different ways that the candidate can do this, and I wanted to make sure it was clear that they could plan for a small group as long as it is intentionally planned to meet the needs of that focus student. So they either reteach or they extend. They provide instruction that deepens and or advances the learning. And the last thing that the candidate needs to do is refer to evidence from steps 1, 2, or 3. In my plan, I did this. In my video or in my commentary, I said or did this. In my reflection, I saw this. So I chose reteach or extension, and then why. So it's really looking back at the cycle and using data to make a decision as to how they would move the students forward. And um, again, candidates need to be working at a pace because this step needs to come pretty close after that summative assessment in order for it to still be fresh in the mind of the learner, of the student that they're working with, and so it can still be applicable to the cycle. All right, so some helpful hints here. One rubric, it's the application of knowledge and reflection gained from the cycle and step 3. They will reteach or extend, and they need to very clearly refer to evidence from a previous step. Now they don't have to say in step 1 plan, I did this. It's nice if they do something like that. It's very clear, but assessors are trained to look and see what the candidate is referring to. Like if they said in my video, we will know that that came from step 2, unless they're referring to their video for step 4. So that could be, it's just make sure that they are very clear that they're talking about in my learning segment template or in my commentary in step 2. It's helpful, very helpful, if the candidate can clearly refer to evidence from previous steps. All right, I think that's the literacy performance assessment. And I'll turn it back over to Julie to talk about condition codes and some other information.
Thank you, Marissa. All right, let's talk about what a condition code is and how you, the program, can support your candidates. So when a candidate submits their TPA, they have to click on a little eyeball icon and they have to look at the template that it is the correct template in the correct place. So Part B template is uploaded in the Part B area and they have to check and look that they've submitted their video clips. And so there is a step where they have to verify everything before it's submitted. However, accidents happen and things get misplaced or uploaded twice and they're missing evidence or their video or is not in the right supported file format and can't be opened. So when that happens, when there's a technical error, the candidate will receive a condition code and it is returned back to them. This can be a little confusing for the candidate. So this is when you really need to step in and remediate and support the candidate through this process. As we look at the next slide, here are the condition codes that a candidate might receive. These are on the CalTPA faculty resources webpage that we provided at the earlier part of this presentation. So it is linked here so that you can help the candidate look and see what that might be. What is the issue? What was missing? What is blank? Illegible? Video can't be opened. So there's some reason why an error occurred, and the candidate will need to fix and then resubmit. Now, moving forward this year with this version, if a candidate receives their submission back with a condition code, cannot be scored because of this technical error, evaluation systems will send them a $50 credit voucher that they can use when they resubmit their corrected work. And they must resubmit, again, all of the parts and pieces, not just the one section. So be on the lookout and tell your candidates that they do get that $50 voucher to be used towards the cost of the resubmission. But a lot of these things can be avoided if the candidate is aware and takes their time when they actually submit their cycle. I will also call out a very important chapter in the assessment guide. It's at the very end, right before the glossary. It's called Submitting Your Evidence. And it walks the candidate through how to label and title their pieces of evidence. It goes through the submitted file supported formats. So for video, it's an MP4, and there's a few other, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a few other supported file formats. I almost think that this should be reviewed first with candidates so that they are very aware that the supported file format is important and how they title and label their evidence is equally important. So as we move on, let's talk about some program support and how you can contact us for support as we look at the next slide. So first, we offer some program office hours. So Marissa and I, on the first and third Fridays of every month, we are available in office hours from 9 to 10. These are very well attended, and programs come with their specific questions. It's also sort of a community time, and other programs from other institutions are there and might have a similar question. So we invite you to come and join us. The Zoom link will be in this presentation. It's also every week in PSD e-news. So if you subscribe to that, which I highly recommend, you can access the Zoom link there. Now, if your candidate would like to come to office hours every week on Wednesdays from 4:15 to 5, Marissa and I are supporting candidates if they have a specific question as well. We're also hosting monthly leadership PLCs, professional learning communities. This is a time for you, the program, to come together. We'll host some theme topics as well as maybe have a speaker or two each month. But really, this is just a really wonderful time for you guys to come together and talk about best practices and support each other through this work. The link is also found in PSD e-news, and we always announce it second Friday of each month. So the second Friday of November will be the next and upcoming PLC. So please join us. We also like to host some digging deeper sessions. Now, this is a deep dive session. We've looked at the rubrics and the templates for the credential specific area, but we host these digging deeper sessions each month to really talk about themes and ways around a specific issue. So as you will see, we've already hosted the first two in September, in August and September, and September and October. And we have to skip November because of a scheduling issue, but we are hosting our next and upcoming Digging Deeper on December 4th. which will be around coaching and mentoring teachers and leaders. So please join us. We always host these links as well as in PSDE News. And, drumroll, we also host the Meredith Fellows Implementation Conference. This is an annual conference. This year it will be on February 5th and 6th, and the theme is data-driven decision-making, leveraging data to improve practice. There is a call for proposals that's in PSDE News now. So if you and others from your faculty that are working around CalTPA or Ed Specialist CalTPA would like to present, we invite you to please submit a proposal. We would love to host you. This is an opportunity, again, for programs to come together. This is a virtual conference, but a time to learn from one another about best practices to support candidates. Let's talk real quick about the Ed Specialist CalTPA and the various submission windows to submit and when candidates will get their results. This is a great backwards planning tool. If you, the program, are encouraging your candidates to, for example, submit before Thanksgiving or something like that. Again, this is a programmatic decision, but this is one way to look at this table. On the right side, it has the dates are when to submit your cycle. So if you submit, let's say, for example, on November 20th, I think that's about the fifth or sixth one down, November 20th. Then if you look directly to the left, the candidate would get their scores on December 11th. So that is a way to backwards plan. The other way to read this table is to look on the left and say, okay, I need my scores by December 11th. That means I need to submit by November 20th. Again, they can submit any time. Doesn't have to be on the 20th at midnight. In fact, I would discourage that highly. Tell your candidates they need 2 or 3 days to submit their evidence, to log into their registration, log in, begin the upload process, triple check, quadruple check that they've uploaded the right document in the right space before they hit that final submit button. We hear a lot of times about traffic around, midnight on the deadline date, and things are slow to upload. And so we just want to encourage you and your candidates to upload days prior. All right. Finally, we want to be able to contact you and your program. So there is a way to do that. We reach out to program coordinators that are designated as such within the ADS system. The ADS is the annual data system that programs submit their information annually every August. But within that system, they have to select one or more of their CalTPA coordinators. So here's a way to log in and double check if you would like to change who receives that information, or if you would like to be added. You need to talk to your dean or the director of your teacher prep program or whoever has access to the login of the ADS site at your institution. And then once they log in and you review who is the CalTPA coordinator, you can update that system from there. There's also an email. I believe it's annual data system at ctc.ca.gov. And you can reach out to them for direct support as well. Finally, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our listservs. We have a CalAPA listserv, a CalTPA listserv, and for you, the DHH community, the Ed Specialist CalTPA listserv. So again, you can click on, it'll take you 10 seconds to enter your name and your email, and you will receive information from us, the performance assessment team. As it becomes available, there's no certain date that these listservs go out, just when we have information, we like to kick it out to the community. And we want to thank you so much for coming today and joining us. And here's how you can reach us. There's lots of emails here, but they're specific. So here on the left, if you have policy questions for us at the commission. The second one down is specific for you, the DHH group. It is EdSped CalTPA at ctc.ca.gov. So you can email us if you have a CalTPA policy question. Now, if you or your candidates have a very technical question about the evaluation systems platform, for example, a candidate can't log in, they have a change of email address or something's happening, they need customer support, whatever that technical issue might be, that second email down, es-sped caltpa at pearson.com is, again, a great contact for you. Of course, the website to bookmark and review often is www.ctcexams.nesinc.com. And you can access all of the registration materials, faculty resource information, guides, helpful hints and reminders, and things like that. And we want to thank you so much for coming today. And Marissa and I will stay along and answer your questions. And we are grateful and best of luck. And please contact us with your questions. Thank you.